Yeah, yeah, it was pretty bad. But I figured it was worth it. I mean, it's the only one available.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so it looks like for some reason so this this is one circulating, but it's just got the most incredibly amateurish translation work for some reason.
Because nobody's done a better one. It's unfortunate, but it's good enough that I overlooked that in this case. I figured, yeah, it's worth overlooking that. That's all you got. Yeah, it'd be good if there was a better one. Deserves it. Deserves it.
Well, obviously, huge points of pride in Spanish history. That's, the heroic war against the Moors sort of thing.
Yeah, somebody commented on the thread where I got it from. Oh, so it has a tragic ending.
Oh, well, at the end, well, I suppose the Spanish king who won the battle died about a year later. Oh, that's right, that's right. When they capture the city, all the feeble and people are too old, so most have fled the Moorish city, but they've left all the people who were too feeble and too old in the mosque. Probably on the idea that maybe the Christians would spare them, but a couple of the invading army burn the mosque down. So I don't know how historically accurate that is. Perhaps it is. I haven't looked at the history closely. This seems to be the battle that established the Christian kingdoms as the dominant power in Spain. After this battle, there was a part of Moorish Spain left which survived another 200 years, but they were on the back foot, trying to keep the Christians on them. So it was a reverse situation. Of course, it was originally the Moors that had dominated Spain with fairly small and insignificant Christian kingdoms surviving. It's one of the amazing things that's uh, with Christendom. Uh, you look at certain years after the Roman Empire decayed. People say, well, it didn't fall until the last of it fell to the Turks, and that's an historical opinion, popular historical opinion now. But when the Romans finally hit a great state of decay, you look at the Christian map; it had shrunk. The Moors were dominating Spain. The barbarians were taking territory which had once been Roman. Constantine had favoured Christianity as the hors d'oeuvre of the day, the religious hors d'oeuvre of the day for his population. He thought, yeah, Christianity, I like this. They seem very organised. I'll make it the state religion. Bang. Christianity, who knows, it might not have ever survived. It might have survived as something fairly small and insignificant.
Yeah.
He turned Christianity into a world power. There were a lot of Christians in the Middle East at one point, and within the Persian Empire as well. The Persians had created a counter church to the Roman Church. Not forgetting the Orthodox, of course, but they regarded themselves as one until they split apart in the 11th century. I think they called it the Church of the East, I think, and it still exists in the form. But like, for example, what we now know as Iraq, which had been, Babylon and Sumer, had become fairly solidly Christian long before the rest of the Roman Empire did. And it was part of the Persian Empire. Same with Armenia. But Christianity spreading in Europe pretty much was a decision from the top. It's a guy having a big board meeting at the top of a tower saying, I think we'll make Christianity the state religion. But you look at a map of things before the time of Charlemagne, the Muslims are generally advancing. What they call the Byzantine Empire was containing them a bit. And these other various barbarian, Turkish tribes and that were eating away at Europe. And yeah, the Vikings, I think the Vikings started off as a religious war. There's good evidence. Historians in previous decades like to deny it, but I think the Vikings felt that they were under threat from the Christians. Famously, of course, Charlemagne had converted the co-brethren, the Saxons, with the utmost violence. And of course, if you're these guys in Denmark and you're thinking, we're going to be next. So I think a lot of it was a breakdown in any sort of international relations. They were blocked from Frankish ports. They only allowed Christians to trade in Frankish ports. So basically it was a war. So there again, Christendom was under threat. Well, they created Danelaw, which at one point had a lot of pagans there. Apparently, the Danish in northern England were still practicing their pagan religion secretly, even though they were claiming to be nominally Christian. But then sometime just before 1000 AD, suddenly, bang, they've converted the King of Denmark under the threat of invasion. The Ottonian Emperor threatened him. He converted. His son actually didn't like it too much, although his son was nominally Christian. He was obviously pagan when his son took power, but it took hold. Eventually, Norway was converted, Sweden was converted, Poland was converted because the Danes were quite influential in Poland, and another Viking leader invaded Russia. And deciding the pagan religion just didn't quite work for a large state, converted the whole of Russia to Christianity. So bang, within half a century, suddenly the barbarian part of Europe mainly converted to Christianity. Christendom was assured. Just think, without Christianity, we never would have got Walt Disney. And so it was out of this, I'm amazed that, like, who would want to invade Europe? It was hardly the richest place in the world. It had a little bit going for it, but you look at the Middle East, you look at India, you look at China, these were far wealthier civilizations. I mean, Europe, for the most part, in the Dark Ages, was just dirt poor.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out, is there some conspiracy going on here? Do these Christians really have so many enemies on the planet Earth that they're willing, from the East, the Turks and Mongolians are willing to invade Europe? It's not even worth the money. The Muslims are invading Europe. It's not worth the money. Uh, I just stand amazed. There's here's a map which I think demonstrates the point. I've used it before. Now I'm assuming the writer and the artist are the same person in this case, in this particular comic, are they? Oh, no, I don't mean the translator, of course, not sure about that, but the person who wrote the story was the same person who did the artwork, is it?
Um, that's what I'm going with. Yeah. Credits aren't very clear.
Well, he's a fairly fine artist, that's obvious.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I think again, he could have come up with something a bit better.
Hmm.
It looks like he's done the work, he's created all the scenes. It's a probably a big piece of work, but I think he could have worked on it a bit more.
Hmm.
There's something in a lot of these scenes, they're just a bit too rigid. Yeah, it's nice formalistic sort of work, but there's just a little bit of rigidity away about it, how it passes through the panes.
Yeah.
By Jesus Cano of the Church, great name.
Yeah, the credits aren't very clear.
Okay. He taught me the love of books, drawing, and history in memory of my father. Okay.
I mean, down at the bottom it says graphic adaptation and layout. Ill wind tidings. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I didn't really spend enough time to see if there was a good review of the comic. It's worthy of a good review.
Maybe someday there'll be an official English translation release. That'd be nice.
Well, you've got, of course, the famous movie, which is predates this battle a little bit. Uh, El Cid.
Hmm. Charlton Heston, right?
Yeah, yeah. A new comic about the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, when my friend Josie Emilio Martinez, to a good connoisseur in pre-medieval period and a great fan of comics, told me he knew the author and the project. I found it very interesting. For those of us who learned about the Roman era by reading Asterix and the Boar, or learned about many universal works thanks to the juvenile literary jewels. The relationship between comics and history is quite natural. Some of those titles, by the way, were set in medieval times, such as The Black Arrow, Richard the Lionheart, The Travels of Marco Polo, A Warrior's Story. The Middle Ages have been traditional setting for Spanish comic strip El Guerrero del Antifaz and El Duque Negro, blah, 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 blah. Rarely exploited the genre but rarely in the historical comic format, a rarely exploited genre anymore, beyond the classical works. Right. You might be right, actually. I think there might have been more historical stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Huzzah! Christendom is saved. In the spirit. Martin Elvira Cabra. All right, he's doing maybe he was the guy that did the translation. Well, some interesting aspects of warfare, of course, that the armor the knights wore in this period could stop most arrows. The arrows could probably pierce the armor if it was at very close range, but of course we imagine archers firing off a lot of, long range arrow fire. And when the arrows have gone a fair distance, they're actually spent. They're not going that fast. There's not that much force in them. And like, for example, the horses tend to have some sort of protection, which could deflect spent arrows. The knights themselves are better armored. They would have the mail armor. Underneath the mail armor, there was some sort of fabric to protect the knight from chafing. And this doesn't tend to be well illustrated, but the knights often wore a textile armor, more than just this textile they got, which has the heraldry on it. They actually wore a proper textile armor over the mail. Now, with all this, even medium range arrows would just stick in the textile. They wouldn't be able to penetrate the mail. They're too spent. They hit the textile armor on the outside, and they just stick out without doing much in the way of injury. Maybe there's a little bit of a pressure injury, but not enough to stop the knight. Now, the English longbow, for example, made things a little bit different by having a far heavier arrow. The longbow arrow was about 2.5 times the weight of the ordinary arrow that most armies were using. So the storm of arrows has to find a weak point. If it went through the eye slot, well, it could do a lot of damage. It found some unprotected flesh on the horse. It could stop the horse. This was just before they were started to put plate armor on as well as extra protection. Of course, the early plate armor was very primitive. It wasn't what we imagine as the fully plate armored knight was only something which appeared in the early 15th century. But they added on plate to this mail arrangement. I think it was the Germans who were first recorded as doing it. Look, I'm looking at page 2 at the moment.
Hmm.
Have you got page 2?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, look at the Moorish guy who's defending
Hmm.
and look at his helmet. What do you see?
Well, like the pattern or
Yeah, he's got a sort of a frame, a crucible sort of frame for the helmet. And that's probably the only metal used in that helmet. The rest of it could be boiled leather. This is the thing that we were still in an era when iron was fairly expensive. There's Swedish records because the Swedes became great iron producers in Europe. That from 1350, after this era, the price of iron fell 7 times till the year 1720. And this is the rise of Europe. Less expensive iron. So, like, for example, when the Europeans went to the East and places like Indonesia to collect spices, the natives rapidly copied the firearms. They had some sort of metallurgical industry. One of the problems was the Europeans were producing, particularly the British, were producing great masses of better quality iron. This is one of the reasons the Europeans were able to overcome much of the Eastern world. The Eastern world tended to not produce great masses of quality iron. They produced iron, but just not in sufficient quantities and sufficient quality. And if you're going to make muskets, for example, Indian metalsmiths could produce a fairly good musket, but they were very few. That was the trouble. I think there is a story that the Indian metalsmiths were producing better muskets than the British at one point until about 1803, but they were just so few in number, whereas the British could just produce masses of muskets. Could hire Indians to be redcoats, and there you go. You have to give the Europeans certainly one credit. They must have been incredibly well organised. This was their strength. There were organised people in the East, but just not as consistently as what was going on with the Europeans, I think. This is, yeah, something people, they don't realise that for the ordinary foot soldier, it's interesting they use the word pawns. I didn't realise. But pawn in Spanish means foot soldier.
Hmm.
Uh, Somehow they've dropped the D. It comes from the word pedi, which was the ancient Roman word for a foot soldier. Oh, there you are. You can see there's an arrow. It looks like this case the horse has mail armour at the front, underneath the little bit of textile, which isn't a proper, except for the horse's face, is a proper padded armour. So the arrows hit and just not really scored much of an injury. This guy was making an effort to be historically accurate, and it's probably not perfect, but it's just pretty much based on what's generally believed at the moment when you've done some research.
Yeah.
Something a lot of people overlook is that the Muslims at this point in history use straight swords, pretty much the same as the Europeans. The scimitar was something derived from the Turks. As the Turks became a great power in the Muslim world, then the scimitar became a lot more popular. The Indians used curved swords. The curved sword was very handy for a cavalryman. Of course, even Europeans started to adopt curved swords for cavalry. But they were actually not suitable for infantry. Well, famously, of course, the Japanese used a curved sword because traditionally the samurai was a mounted warrior. But during their great period of warfare in the 16th century, horses are quite a logistics problem. And so a lot of the samurai fought dismounted but retains their curved swords. But in the Meiji period, when Japan was opening up to Europeans, they started using straight swords, so straight samurai swords, which the ninja had been famous for using straight swords because they were infantry. So it seems that there's a point that the curved sword's not really a good one when you're on foot. You're far better with a straight sword. But for cavalry, the scimitar became the big thing because of the Turks, but it still hadn't penetrated that into the Muslim world at this stage, the era of this comic. Okay, and page 5 has a medieval frieze there.
Yeah.
That's just Natalia.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, she was supposed to do some work for a friend. He wanted the background to. He's got a sort of a. He was doing some sort of a cartoon, and he wanted Natalia to do the background, but she slacked off like usual, and he was going. Last night he sent her a message. Where's the file? She hasn't done a thing, you see. So
Yeah, right. Yeah.
she said, "Oh, I said, how long will it take you to do it?" She said, "About 4 hours."
Well, you don't want to do something, just say no.
It seems he actually paid her money to do it, I think, for some reason.
That's different.
There's another phrase at the bottom of page 5, and so these are actual medieval phrases, which
Yeah.
can give people a very good idea of what's going on with the armor. Okay, these guys, they do appear to have some armor on the front of the horses. Okay. Well, an arrow's probably not going to get through that. Uh, the typical arrow at the time could only penetrate armor if it was fired at a fairly, very, very close range where there was still a lot of force. The longbow, even the longbow, of course, well, it could readily penetrate armor if it was fired from a relatively close range. Longer ranges it couldn't, but the longbow arrow was much heavier and could probably be a bit nastier if it hit even at longer ranges. Around the year 1200, the Iberian Peninsula was a territory disputed almost equally by Western Christianity and African Islam. Okay. African Islam might go a bit astray in the English vernacular. In the northern half, there were Christian kingdoms of Portugal, Castilla, Navarre, and Aragon, allies or against each other. Okay, yeah, that goes a bit astray in English, according to the circumstances and interests of each one. Yeah, this is actually amazing that whoever did the translation has not. They must know somebody who can speak colloquial English. Say, look at this dude, what do you think? And the English guy's just going to, face palm. Oh, there we are, page 8. Nice little picture of Spain. So Toledo is right on the border. Okay, now they're saying they had Arab light cavalry and Turks as well. Well, this is interesting. I didn't think of that, but looking at the Turkish figures, the Turks were the ones that brought the scimitar into the Middle Eastern world. Who fret our fields. Well, not threaten our fields. Threaten our lands, of course, when he's saying, yeah. So the enemies of our holy cross who fret our fields, our homes, and our people. Okay, page 14, burning some heretics. Right, yeah, it does mention the Albigensian Crusade. His ambition led him to be Archbishop of Narbona in March 1212, and it is then when the Pope's call arrived for a new crusade, this time against the Muslims of Hispania, which he did not hesitate to join because of his fanatic hates of the Muslims, heretics, and because of the dirt in which the friars of the order of Calatravia at that time, of Salvatierra, which defended on the sister rule were found. Alluding to the importance of grammatical structures in language. As, of course, the interesting thing, I don't know another language, but they say English, of course, is a European language which lost what was basically the traditional inflected grammar of most European languages, which probably makes it a much easier language for people who are foreign to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably one of the reasons English has been so successful. It's because it's a pidgin language.
Hmm.
This happened in the Middle Ages because at one point the Danes had been dominant in Northern England, and Northern England spoke Old Danish. And as the Saxons reconquered them, they had similar words for everything, practically the same words, but very different grammatical structures. And that caused the loss of the inflected structure in English, which might have had some advantages. I can have a look at page 17. I see a fleet of ships. So some sort of Mediterranean design, which probably would have been used by the Byzantines as well, but not a very close illustration. These boats had a problem. And this was a problem of all ships of the ancient world, which generally didn't matter that much, but they didn't have a very strong keel. This is, the famous Chinese yunks, an example of this, a boat It's very lightweight. It made them fast in light winds, which might have been very important in the Mediterranean. But the problem, because they didn't have a strong keel, you couldn't just have one sail on the boat. You had to have multiple sails that spread the stress of the driving force of the wind along the rest of the boat. Now, what developed in Europe, in Northern Europe, of course, they were facing much rougher seas in general, was a very strong keel, which could simply rely on one single sail, a very large sail. And because of the keel, the force could be spread across the whole ship via the keel rather safely. And this was the Europeans developed the carrack, which was a heavy vessel, which had this very strong keel, which evolved in the later ships. So when they went to European ships went to the east, they were heavy ships. So the Chinese yunks were quite fast, because the kind of larger yunks had all these sails right along the ship to spread the force throughout the ship, very lightweight, great in a light wind. But of course, they couldn't tangle with a European ship, even though they were generally faster. Of course, the point to be recalled is that the Moors of Spain were typically armed and armoured in a fairly European sort of fashion. I think the comic makes a claim that they, of course, the Moors that were coming from Africa were quite barbaric by their standards. The Moors of Spain had become accustomed to a richly civilized social order and material culture. You'll see on page 20, they're using the tree bucket. It's the standard sort of catapult of that period.
Trebuchet.
Ah, trebuchet. Yeah, it's my mispronunciation. I think it literally does mean tree bucket, doesn't it?
One of the rare times I'll correct your pronunciation.
Okay, page 21. I just love some religious people. This was a century later, of course, we had the famous debate that was in the name of the rose, where the Franciscans claimed that the riches of the church were wrong. And I mean, of course, you have cardinals and bishops, and these guys are all political appointments. They usually they're the second sons of nobility. And man, I'm not going into religion and sweating my way at a Bible if I'm going to live in discomfort. Stuff that. I want to have a good time. I want to, find life pleasant before I finally make it to heaven. This was, of course, a period when the church was becoming a power which decided it could order the kings around a bit. So famously, they were at loggerheads with the German who was ruling the Holy Roman Empire, Barbarossa, who eventually was forced to kneel to the church. But eventually, after a century, the church was becoming that pushy that, of course, the King of France kidnapped the Pope and took him to Avignon. And that was the downfall of the power of the papacy. But this was a period when they were ordering kings around. Okay, page 22, a nice little domestic scene. The guy singing, "Oh, it's just great to live in the Middle Ages, isn't it?
Mm.
There's no plague, no rotten teeth, none of the other problems." Although probably, I remember, when they did archaeology on the Vikings, I pointing out that the teeth were generally pretty good because they didn't have access to as much in the way of sweets
Sure.
that other peoples had. And they did also clean their teeth with toothpicks, which was an advantage. So you didn't necessarily have to have bad teeth in the Middle Ages if you clean your teeth properly and avoided an excess of fruit and sugar, which, of course, I think the Vikings had honey, but it was pricey stuff. If you had bad teeth, you're probably rich.
Mhm.
It's the same with alcoholism. I think that was a point I was making in Rick's meeting. Well, you go back before the 18th century, and you had to be rich to be an alcoholic. The poor person just couldn't afford enough of a drink to really go anywhere. But then came the industrial age and the industrial production of gin, for example, in England in the 18th century. And of course, the famous era where the public became alcoholics. They had affordable alcohol. Okay, page 22. The Albigensian heretics and Miro Molan have allied themselves against Pope Innocent with the help of these heretic demons. The infields will plant. Okay, not the infidels, the infields. Something in baseball, isn't it? You have an infield in baseball, don't you?
Yeah.
Will plant the banner of Muhammad over the church of St. Peter and will force the Holy Father to kneel before them. And what can we do? Don't you hear God's call to fight the enemies of our holy cross? Evidently, Salvaterra was not Jerusalem, and the alliance between Albigensians, Cathars, and the Amalekids was very unlikely. Okay, there's page 23. The crossbow was becoming more prominent in this period. It started showing up a bit earlier in the late Dark Ages, I think. Of course, the Chinese used crossbows quite massively. And basically, the crossbow was something you use if you just can't get a good supply of natural archers. Archers tended to be people who naturally used the self bow, as they call it. And it's not that easy, usually a countryman, yeah, it's just not that easy to, if a guy doesn't use a bow, you're generally not just you're not going to get a good archer. It takes apparently, years of training and practice to produce a good archer. But the crossbow, with a little bit of training, any idiot can use one. You want a cheap soldier in these medieval towns. Okay, dude, here's your armor, here's your crossbow. Now you're dangerous. A cheap creation which you could produce something dangerous. So crossbowmen became important and more important as the supply of natural archers were less common. Of course, the English reversed the trend by forcing their entire yeoman population to practice archery. So I don't know how many people were practicing archery in Britain about a century after this story, maybe 250,000. And out of that 250,000, you can pick the best. And this is what people don't realise about the longbowmen, which achieved these spectacular successes against the French. Yeah, this was probably a pick of 1 in 10 out of the British population. So the upper 10% of good archers. Whereas when they fought the War of the Roses in England, the longbow wasn't as prominent anymore because you're fighting with a lot of bad archers or archers that just weren't that great. You've heard of Vlad Dracul, who was the Wallachian prince, of course. And they actually used a fairly similar method to the English, but they were using weak self-bows. Most of their peasantry were archers, and they put in place stakes to protect them. So the Wallachian nobility and boyars were not too heavy cavalry. They didn't tend to have the heavier armour that was being used in the wealthier parts of Europe. Okay. Knights, they had a word for it. They were calling the knights from other parts of Europe other than Spain. They had some word for them, the outer man or something like that. And they were a bit unruly. Okay. Don't touch me, you Jewish dog. Oi, thieves, give me those silks back. To the thief, to the thief. Get away, damn Jews. Crucifiers of Christ, death to the Jews. I killed the Lord and now you try to scam us. In this city, there are too many Jews, to the burning with them. This was just before 1200 was a period when intolerance of the Jews was starting to become big. They were uh, driven out of some of the European countries. I think England drove them out around this time. France was trying to drive a lot of them out. I don't know if they fully succeeded. You might conclude that whatever role the Jews were playing, that maybe other people were becoming bankers. I think the church, famously in Robin Hood, the church was a money lender. Okay, yeah, so bottom of page 24. Alvaro Stuns was paralysed when he saw how those crusaders attacked the Toledo Jews, who had until now had lived with the city's Christians and Muljars without major difficulties. Well, that will please all our fellow liberals, won't it? They love that sort of stuff. They lap it up. And it's probably in general true that when you have a very good economy and things are going well, different groups of people, I'm doing well, you're doing well. They're going to be progressive. They're not going to fight and spoil everything. But watch out when things socially and economically start to go badly. Like for Britain, for example, Britain was, of course, a very wealthy country, and it's now in decline. And so, you've got a huge amount of ethnics in Britain. But now Britain is becoming so poor, it's in a lot of difficulties. And a struggle's is gonna show up. And you'll think, well, these are no longer the enlightened British that we once knew. For example, the British at the end of World War I thought they could still maintain their empire. America was a rising power. Oil was a huge issue. The British suddenly realised that their grand empire had very little in the way of oil resources. So what do we do about that? Invade a place that's got oil, particularly Iraq, Persia.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to build their empire. They took part of, this is a thing over the Palestinian question. This is, people overlook this, that there hadn't been a Palestinian state. It was simply a province in the Turkish Empire. And of course, the British took over, along with the French, parts of the Turkish Empire. They're colonisers. Palestine is a colony. What do we do with colonies? We try to extract money from the colony. I know. All these Jews want to go to Palestine. Well, they're pretty good at making money. Yay! We'll put all these Jews in Palestine. Now, the British thought, we expect you guys to get along, We're all in this together, and the most important thing in the world is making money. And it sort of didn't work out, and the British are quite surprised. Well, the British think, well, we have Britain, and there's a lot of differences in Britain. There's Yordies, there's Yorkshiremen, there's Londoners, there's Welsh, there's Scottish, there's Irish. And on occasion, some of them have had a bit of a beef, but generally they will work together. And this is because there was opportunity. Britain was a place of opportunity. If you worked well, you did a good job, you could be successful. America was a place where people could be successful. And when that happens, when there's a successful economy, the different groups will work together. It's like the African Americans, you know what I mean? Things weren't as troublesome in general as today. It's like some African American guy said he was a kid wandering around what are now violent neighborhoods. He said, you know, when I was a kid, it just wasn't like that. People, there might have been violent people, but they respected a certain amount of public order. But look at Chicago today. And this is when America is still a pretty wealthy place. So this is something I try to point out. You know, you got all these Americans saying Rick's group, and a lot of them are thinking about, you know, welfare payments. I'm pointing out that compared to some parts of the world, you're still in the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you really want to see some grinding poverty, you know, you can pick some spots in Africa, go to some places in South America, you can go to certain places in Asia, and these are people that are really living hand to mouth. And to me, it's amazing that you get people who think they're, well, I'm not the richest around in a rich country, and they don't realise they say trickle down is rubbish, but it's not true. Trickle down actually works. Wealthy people buy cars, new ones. They don't always make the greatest choice. Then they get bored with it and sell it. And the poorer guy can get himself quite a good car at a much cheaper price than you. But they'll keep on screaming there is no trickle down. you you can go to a charity store in America, and you can, if you look around, you can find some pretty good stuff. So looks like Spain overall was a fairly wealthy, well-ordered place, whether it was Muslim or Christian. And of course, it was very hierarchical, and they used the sword to keep the order. Obviously, people down the bottom of the heap, and they probably didn't do too well, but they were kept in line. Okay, page 26. I'm glad that the papal legate wears a broad hat in the Spanish sun. So, you know, any exposed skin in strong sun is not going to do too well. And so I think Spain's a place where you do get strong sun at certain points of the year. It's something I have to watch out in Melbourne, even in Melbourne, that the warmer 6 months of the year, you have to think about protecting your skin. The cooler 6 months, the sun's relatively low. It's not a great risk. And of course, you've got that problem in California as well. during summer, exposing your skin to strong sun is quite risky. Okay, Toledo's at 39 degrees, very similar to Melbourne. So yeah, it could have strong sun during summer. Okay. Yeah, well, Matala's parents have gone back to Indonesia about a month ago or something. Or I just hope she doesn't get. She's got this strange idea. She hasn't got a license yet, and I know she has gone driving long distances by herself without a license. And I've kept on warning her it's a very bad temptation. Like she's got a shops which are just down the road, and I said to her, "Well, you can drive there. You're only going over a short distance. You're very familiar with the routes. But if you have an accident somewhere and they find you haven't got a license, you're in bad trouble." To the point where she could be kicked out of the country, which just wouldn't be very advantageous for her. She's taken to seeing a psychologist lately. She's had a couple of meetings.
Hmm.
200 Aussie dollars for an hour. This with Natalia, there's a few pointers where she just doesn't seem to understand reality. And like even when I was a kid, I was a sort that I'm not going to drive a car by myself without a license.
Yeah.
And years ago, you could have gotten away with it. These days, they got very heavy fines. I think, it's like $12,000 or 6 months in jail. And this is a risk for Metalia because if you commit a crime which has 6 months in jail attached to it, that potential, that's enough to get you barred from the country permanently. You can commit a few, small wrongs, and that's not going to affect your visa or residency status.
Hmm.
I've sort of been warning her that we grew up in the Western world, which was a lot easier. And it's, I mean, you can, perhaps you've seen it yourself, that your society is becoming tougher. Jobs are a lot tougher than they were 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you got a pretty ordinary job. You were well paid, you were well treated. Today, it's no longer the case in America.
Hmm.
And this is part of the social problem which is building.
Hmm.
Now, of course, you know, Western countries 200 years ago had a hierarchical order, which was fairly good at keeping the people in the lower part of society under control. But, you know, when you've got liberalism has come along and says everybody's really equal, I mean, really, really, really equal, it's an idea that just doesn't work. I think we've been learning that in the Kenneth Smith readings, haven't we? When he's pointing out that Greek society was a hierarchy of competence and in some cases incompetence. And this is the thing not to forget, that if you become an aristocrat, it's a job. You have to be good at it. You have to have all those cogs in your brain firing off. You can't just be of the servile class and be almost a walking stiff on certain issues. You have to be with it in a big way if you want to be a successful aristocrat. If you want to be a banal size, you know, you're a merchant, you're a craftsman. There again, you have to be a bit with it with your craft, whereas the aristos has to be with it as regards social issues, how society works, politics.
Hmm.
We don't have that anymore, really. We had such a successful economy that people felt they could do without that social order, and they're partly right. But now that economy is no longer the powerful thing that it was between 1850 and 1950. It's very interesting that, you know, when you study history, then you study how these societies worked. And of course, we're dealing with an economy which is on the level of Ethiopia in the 19th century, where people were still using cows as the main form of money. And so to a rich life was the preserve of very few at the top. Hence why entering the church was so popular for people who had nothing better to do, because at least they could get 3 meals a day. To Metalia. Where have you been driving? Woolies for shopping, which, you know, this place is about 1.5 kilometres just down the road. And where else, I will ask? For example, she goes down to this supermarket. Well, it's a fairly easy drive. She's very familiar with the way. The chances of her having an accident are fairly dim. But you go somewhere that's a bit strange, you drive somewhere that's a bit strange, you can easily get confused.
Well,
Yeah, like you got these nights and you wonder how many servants did they have? It's something often overlooked that a knight's in their prime would be training a squire, a squid, it seems. Maybe that was a word for a squire. I saw it there. I don't know whether it was a mistranslation, but we do have the word squid in Western culture. And a squid is a person of limited competence who makes mistakes. And the Spanish do seem to use the word escudo or something like that, which means squire, for a person who's hot-headed, doesn't know their limits, can make massive errors. And of course, the knight would also be supported by an older ex-knight who knew the ropes, just wasn't physically there anymore, but could be fairly useful. And these guys had to find a meal ticket, struggling for a meal ticket in the Middle Ages was probably a bit more difficult than struggling for one these days. I asked one of the online AIs, I was interested in Egyptian chariots. And I was wondering, well, how many people, how many servants were supporting a chariot team? Uh, they would have had to have people that could repair the chariots, people that could look after the horses. Because one thing your expert warrior likes doing, it's tough enough being a warrior. They don't want to do too much work other than that. They only want to train for their role. That's their work. They don't want to look after the horses. They don't want to organise the food. They want servants for that. So I asked the computer, it could give me nothing. And one of the paragraph concerns fantasy role-playing chariots with orcs in it or something. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is just AI. Yeah. You're telling me AI is on the point of singularity. Yeah, I don't think so somehow. Or you remember Rick poo-pooing all that in the meetings?
yeah.
And he does it. And people don't realise that the market's going to give you the most optimistic lie it can tell you because they want you to buy. We're not going to tell you the facts.
Yeah.
It's like calling Donald Trump a liar. Yeah, he's selling himself. He's going to present the most enthusiastic picture of himself, which has a slight departure from reality. They all do. You can't be a liar and turn around and call Donald Trump a liar when they're all liars. Maybe he's just not lying with the particular method they use. Okay, page 26. They've got a little scene of a horse and cart, two-wheeled cart. One, of course, the disadvantages in this era, and that became important during the industrial age, is they started, I think you might have seen them if you go on touring somewhere and you see an old cart, they've got a steel rim around the wheel to prevent wear. And this is something that was only becoming into vogue in the Industrial Revolution. So wheels would have worn fairly quickly. When it's just timber, maybe they put leather on them or something like that and replace the leather occasionally. Okay, she admits she's gone a little bit further afield, which I warned her, just the one place you're going to go, just go down to that supermarket, don't go anywhere else. Yeah, they're pointing something out here that the armies in Spain, I think the majority of the cavalry was actually a lighter form of cavalry. The heavy knights were a minority. Of course, there were lighter forms of cavalry in the rest of Europe as well, but in Spain, they were particularly prominent. And of course, the thing with light cavalry is the horses are lighter. And lighter horses have more stamina than big, heavy horses that knights tended to mount. The big, heavy horses were good for a battlefield charge over a certain distance, but they were exhausted a lot more quickly than light horses, which would move slower, but over longer distances. And this is a major point with light cavalry that most people are not aware of. The governor of Fez, this is page 28, the governor of Fez and Sita do, you remember they have been in prison for more than a year. They have been publicly beheaded after the Friday prayer. So some important guys been beheaded. Okay, we've got a page 29, a picture of some using Turkish mercenaries. Okay, these guys seem to have some sort of a scimitar, which would probably be accurate. But of course, if they lost their swords, they were going to be stuck trying to pick up straight swords that were being produced in, say, Spain. So even the Turkish, even if their native weapon was a scimitar, they might still end up with straight swords. People You see all these movies of the traditional crusades in Palestine, and the Arabs are always shown with scimitars. That's not true. At that period, they were still using European style straight swords. Page 30, massacre the prisoners. Be a good Christian. Oh, there's that word there. The ultramontanes, impatient to enter into combat and thirsty for Sarra's blood, assaulted it and once surrendered, knifed the majority of the garrison, as they would have done with the Albigensians in France. That useless massacre was not approved by Alfonso VIII when it happened. Oh, well, look, mate, our Spanish king's just a really nice guy. Bad things that happened under his reign are not his fault. But this is a thing that when you're fighting these campaigns and even normal life, they're under such pressure that they would look the other way when bad things happen. It actually takes an effort to be humane. Bad things will happen in bad times or hard times. Okay, yeah, still page 30. So we've got the city there. There's a big water wheel, which was a technology used in the Middle Ages. I think grinding flour was one of the big ones. Okay, they tried to cross the river and the river's been sown with caltrops. Okay, so in this case, they've got ballistas on the top of the battlements. I'm not too sure what they look very Roman, those ballistas. Yeah, I don't know if they were using Roman style ballistas in the Middle Ages. They might have been using something else. What do we gain by taking this city? We'd better keep looking for the mirror mole and it's true, sir, the men and weapons that we lose here will be needed later. So yeah, trying to take a city. Okay, I've got to look up this word ultra mon. Oh, right. I was at a restaurant with Mattel there and a few science fiction friends last night.
Hmm.
And this lady, she turned around to Mattel there and said, "You're not a." Oh, that's right. There's a guy that used to go. He's a huge Donald Trump fan, Renato, but he cracked up with him about 10 years ago. Doesn't come to the meetings anymore. I said, "Oh, Natalia is a big Donald Trump fan." As well. She looked around at Natalia. And I said, Natalia would want a Donald Trump doll to take to bed with her.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's like Renato. I mean, he's an intelligent guy, and he thinks Donald Trump is like sheer perfection.
Hmm.
Now, I might be favourably inclined towards Donald Trump, but I don't view him as human perfection. I see a person with a lot of faults.
Hmm.
Ultramontanism was a school of thought of the Catholic Church which promoted extreme papal authority in matters of spiritual and governments. Ultramontaners rejected modern ideas in favour of supremacy of Catholicism and the Catholic Church in public life. Hmm.
Hmm.
Ultramontanans, anans, anans. Okay, I thought it meant probably knights coming from outside Spain, but uh, guys coming from outside Spain who are extremely fired up by the Catholic Church, maybe. The term descends from the Middle Ages when a non-Italian pope was said to be Papa Ultramontano, a pope from beyond the mountains. Okay. Right, so it means from beyond the mountains. Cool. In this case, beyond the Pyrenees. Well, what I thought it would probably mean. I mean, you look at page 31, you look how these guys are standing. It's just so formal. It just needed to be a little bit more work to make it look a little bit less deadpan, I think.
Hmm.
Calm down. Don't you notice that the city is full of foods, equipment, and weapons that will be very good to us? Or maybe you should have said very good for us. And the loot. What do you tell me about the boot? Don't you interest? Oh, that reminds me of Manuel, the Peruvian I used to know and used to hang about with. Yeah, I think he said, don't you interest once. Of course we are interested. Since you steal from us our spiritual reward, at least you won't dare to take away from us. How dare you? I, our Lord, the King of Castilia, is the one who disposes the city, and only what he says will be done.
Yeah.
Okay, page 32. So it's got a little bit of a map here. Now, the trick was there was a standard pass to go down, but somebody gave them something like your cattle track as a way of going around the pass. You're checking this map on page 32. It's got a little, down the bottom, it's got a little tower and it says Save Earth. I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
Hmm.
Is there a fort, a castle called Save Earth?
Right.
Okay, now the Moorish camp's going to execute some guy for some reason. Meanwhile, Yusuf bin Quartus appeared at the Caliph's camp to explain the surrender of Calatrava. It was received with love by the Andalusians. Falls, but the Vizier Abu Said bin Yami ordered to arrest him. The Amaleds were outraged with what Ibn Qudus had done. Okay. Calatrava had been well garnished and equipped to resist a long siege. All right, the city had been well garnished and equipped to resist a long siege, thus entertain and wear the enemy. I think he meant detain rather than entertain.
Yeah.
Oh, well, he got the chop. No Zoom bombers today. Okay, page 39. Yeah, you can see what the common infantrymen and even the poorer cavalry wouldn't tend to have mail. So mail armor was very expensive. Uh, Price. Very popular amongst the Roman troops for a period of time, but very expensive stuff. I was just thinking, I think a good mail suit would cost you about 20 sols. Uh, that sort of work out to be. So it's about 12, 12 silvers to a sol. Let's say 20 sols, a sol would be enough to feed a person for a month. So 20 sols, probably worth probably about 20 months common labour. They had to make the armour. They had to beat the iron out into thin sheets, and then they struck the rings out of the armour with punches. Some of the rings then had to be split, and they had to be sort of nailed with a pin as the armour was assembled. So I think the minimum, it'd probably take a relatively unskilled person who'd been trained to link the armour at least 3 months constant work to make it, just to put all the rings together. Okay, page 40, the Arab infantry. And trouble with most infantry in this period is most of it wasn't very good, poorly trained, and they couldn't stand up to knights terribly well, but they were viewed as expendables. Oh, there, page 40, got a scene of the Turks shooting arrows at the Crusaders. Okay, page 41. And one last warning, no one charges or breaks a formation before signs indict. Only at my order they will successfully load the forward, the middle, and finally, when necessary, the rear. So, okay, this is his battle plan. He's got 3 lines. Okay, he's got the vanguard. I have to look this one up a bit. It's when you got a lot of lines, it tends to be a fairly defensive position. If you're attacking, you tend to put everything at the front. For example, if the Romans adopted a more defensive position, you'd have a cohort. Let's say a century. A century would have about a frontage of about 20 and about 4 lines deep. But if they ordered an all-out attack, the formation changed. You had the frontage became about 10, and there was about eight lines deep. And most people don't know this. You've got no idea. They don't understand what this deeper formation is. They call it a wedge. And it wasn't actually a triangle shape, properly speaking. It was formed as a square. But due to the nature of the way the troops operated, the troops at the front closed together more, and the ones at the back were looser. So you had it did take on the appearance of a slightly wedge shape, the all-out attacking formation. Okay, page 42. Well, we've got our African friends being whipped. Not too sure on the story here. The Arabs did use a lot of Negro slaves, which they, I believe, emasculated. Very, very, I think this is Angelina. She's a half Arab. Of course, she points out the factor which people overlook in this tradition of slavery, that the medieval Europeans had lost the arts of slavery. They had serfdom, They didn't even know how to handle slaves. They had lost, they'd lost the skill. And when the Spanish and Portuguese went to places where having a lot of slaves was a big advantage, who taught them the art of slavery? The Arabs. Well, chattel slavery, that is. Requires great skill to handle people that you've reduced to the level of property. It's a different issue if you have a system where of servitude where you start at the bottom and because of good behaviour you receive rewards and eventually freedom. Very different world. The chattel slavery was viewed as being unchristian originally in the Middle Ages, and they changed their tune later on. I believe the Moors did have some sort of elite formation of Negroes. I'm not sure how they fought. This illustration looks a bit unrealistic where they're fighting in some semi-naked fashion. I think this is highly unlikely. I would expect they fought as probably fully equipped soldiers. You know, they would have had clothing, maybe some textile armour. In this case, they're saying they've got long spears. Maybe that's the case. So, yeah, they had slave soldiers. Okay, right, yeah, okay. You go on to page 43, they've got slave soldiers. Okay. Yeah, but when the Muslims called them slave soldiers, they weren't normally tied together. They were expected to serve, that was all. They were expected to behave themselves. They were at a sort of liberty. They had lots of soldiers they called slave soldiers. They had Turks they called slave soldiers like the Mamelukes. And the slave soldiers ended up ruling Egypt like the Mamelukes did. They just I suppose they were proving Hegel's point, weren't they? So the slaves become smarter than the masters. So I'm not sure about this bit, you know, you'd have to research it, but I think this is very doubtful. Maybe he's seen the term slave soldier and thought it meant somebody completely subjecticated. And I know they did have a formation of Negro soldiers, and I don't think they would have been emasculated either. I don't think, despite what great Game of Thrones claims, I don't think eunuchs make great soldiers. Now, this is all from memory. I sort of was into wargaming at one point, and I remember the bit of the orders of the various armies. Okay, there is no God but Allah. The power is all from God. There is no strength but in God. Allah is our Lord. Muhammad our envoy. El Mahdi our magnet. Okay, he's a magnet. Cool. O merciful God, give us victory today, if it is your will. And if I have to die, grant me the prize of paradise, or at least save my family and my relatives from the wrath of the Christians, because at the end and after I have come to fight to defend your name, O God, and the land that you gave my ancestors that feeds my people. Okay, the Christians are praying to God as well. So what do you think of that when both sides pray to God? Page 44. I remember this one. Kiri election, not Kiri liaison.
Yeah, right. Right.
You could have gone one step further and had Kiri erection. I'm starting to wonder if this guy's having a beef with the comic book author. I'll translate this in a really funny way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Those who die fighting today will have the reward of Eden. In the paradise of Allah, a garden full of fountains, trees, and beautiful women, like you have never imagined. Well, that must have been the guys who went and did 9/11.
Mm. Mm.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I was talking with yeah, the lady at the science fiction Janice. Yeah, she believes in all the conspiracy theories. She thinks 9/11 was there's a big conspiracy going on there. And I might accept there was a minor conspiracy going on somewhere, but people just won't believe that somehow the aircraft crashing into those buildings brought them down. Or of course when debris came down on that other building as well, that caught fire and collapsed, and they just can't believe that can happen.
Mm.
And they show those pictures of the aluminium that had been the plane's hull, fully melted and pouring like a stream from the top of the skyscraper. And yeah, it's right. Those planes are almost fully loaded with jet fuel. You have a fire going in the contained space of that building, and you've got a bit of stuff to burn in the building. You're going to get an incredibly hot fire.
Mhm.
And it will melt the aluminium. Aluminium doesn't have the highest melting point in the world.
Mm.
And then because that weakens the steel supporting structure, and you've got a huge amount of weight above those break points, eventually it's going to come down. It'll survive for a while. Okay, page 48, the couched lance. Uh, Now, when cavalry goes up against infantry, the horses aren't going to collide with the infantry. They might charge in and try to terrify the infantry into running for it, which probably happened quite a lot of the time. But when they got up to the infantry, if it stood, the knights are going to have to slow down. And what they literally did with the lancers is they pushed forward at a certain speed at a walking pace and pushed against the infantry. The infantry might protect themselves with shields, but the lancers would push against the infantrymen. And you've got the weight of a horse behind you, so you've got about 400 kilograms of horse plus a rider. So you're looking at half a ton behind that spear, that lance. And you're just an ordinary infantryman. And especially if you're untrained, don't really have much of a chance. But if you're well trained, you can stand against it. And if you do manage to bring the cavalry to a halt, the only thing the knights can do to be effective is rear up and then walk in again with the lancers to try and push against the infantry. And you can do that so many times that eventually the horses become exhausted. And horse exhaustion was a big thing. Once you had exhausted one of these charging horses, it was poops for the rest of the day. It was going to take a considerable time to recover. So you had to reserve your charge for a good moment. Oh, okay, it's got a rather rigid looking picture of the knights charging on page 49. Okay, the Turks are shooting arrows and retreating before the knights. The arrows, of course, are breaking against any things solid in the way of armor, like the helmet. So this is still page 50. Page 50. Okay, we've got the knights peppered with arrows. And this is literally what would happen. The armor would stop ordinary arrows. So they might suffer a small injury, a bruise, maybe a cut. But for example, yeah, okay, page 51, the infantry is running for it, which is probably what happened most of the time in front of a charge by knights. Yeah, this was an era when there wasn't much in the way of good purpose infantry. Most of it was expendables. Okay, page 53. So you got the close fight scene. So some guys have dropped their lance and are using their sidearm. I have heard this description. But once they dropped their lances, their effect was starting to decline. And if the infantry held for too long, they were going to have to retreat. So got page 54, we've got a line of 4 deep spearmen with archers behind them. So that was a sort of standard formation. Sometimes the archers would go to the front and run behind the spearmen when the cavalry was coming. Right, no, so page 55, we've got an interesting picture of the formation. Looks interesting. I'll have to explore that one, explore the battlefield. Now, like I said, a lot of the infantry were just expendables. They weren't particularly good. A lot of the people that might have been in the rear lines would have been camp servants who were next to useless. These armies would take a lot of servants with them who weren't properly combatants. Okay, quite a long battle. Okay, you gods repraise you, Lord, with we are fattening on page 67. I'm not sure what the phrase we are fattening is supposed to mean.
Fascinated.
No, I don't know if they would have used the word fascinated. Uh, we are we are arising, we have won. So there's something in Spanish there. How familiar are you with Spanish, Dave?
Not at all.
All right, so you're living in a region which has a lot of Hispanics, but you haven't even reached Terminator level use of the Spanish language.
No. I can barely pass with the one I have, Stephen.
Well, famously in Terminator 2, the kid starts teaching the Terminator Spanish. Which is a bit strange, actually. You'd figure the Terminator had, if you go by the first movie, seemed to have, probably was able to speak a few languages because he could mimic a particular human voice, for example. Obviously, the Terminator in number two was an inferior model. Okay, the population flees the city. So he gets his father on page 72 and takes him to the mosque, and he can't take his father with him. So all the poor people, all the get left behind in the mosque. Christians get in, start looting the place, and a few of them decide to burn down the mosque. Really nice guys. Yeah, you could come to and say, oh, you could always burn down the mosque tomorrow. Let's think about it for 24 hours. Okay, page 75. The mosque is going up in flames. So there's quite a long aftermath here. So we finally get to page 77 and 78. So we have the nice little scene, celebration. Uh, the monks holding crosses at the front. Later centuries always remembered that the Navas of Tolosa was the most glorious battle of the so-called Reconquista, right? Okay. In which Christian weapons raved with the triumph of Western Europe over Islam, Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula. Okay. Which cement the beginning and of the end of El Andalus. So the kingdom of Granada survived for another 200 years. Okay, that's our 2 hours, I think. Well and truly done. Yep, 2 hours, 10 minutes. So what's on next week?
Well, the ones I think will do, I think you should have in your archives already. We just haven't done them formally yet. I sent them to you. The young CLR James,
Oh, okay. I'll just have to look up next week's meeting to get the title.
Well, you should have it downloaded. If you don't, let me know. But believe you, I can even tell you when I sent them to you.
Yeah, well, I have retained everything that you've sent. So unless there was a glitch when I was transferring them or something like that, they should be usable.
The young CLR James, and the other one is A Full Life, colon, James Connolly, the Irish rebel.
Yeah, that one I recall actually. Yeah, that's right. Uh,
So I put those on the schedule, and that you should probably have them in your drive already. They're both short enough. We'll double up on them.
okay, right. James Connolly. James Connolly. CL James.
There,
The
yeah.
the panic tables. That's it, is it? There's nothing else.
I did send it to you back in November.
Last year.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, well, I should be able to find it. Let's see. Uh, November last year. Okay. Uh, oh, right, right. Yeah, I'm using this new computer. Okay, I'll look at it. Stick in the Dynabook 1 TB portable SD sort of thing. I think it's all on there. They seem to be selling the Dynabooks at the moment. That was about the cheapest one of the portable 1 TB SSDs.
hmm. And the James Connolly book, I'm not sure I can.
On the book, Lenovo documents. Okay, 23. I might have to do a search. coming up as yet.
Hmm.
Oh, it could be, so I was been a bit rough sometimes how I put them down. Okay, documents back to. Mm,
Hmm.
Okay, so what was the other comic you were talking about? That was
One was the young CLR James. The other one was A Full Life, James Connolly, the Irish Rebel.
oh right, okay, A Full Life. Okay, that's the title.
Oddly, I can't find when I sent that to you, but I know I have the memory that I sent it to you.
Both of them, yeah, I can remember now. Yeah, there's something. Yeah, I think they are ones that I've looked at.
Right. I'm wondering if you might have read them, in which case it'd be a quick read. In which case, we could triple up and do the Panic Fables, which I also don't expect will be a long read, but we'll play that by ear.
So the headline of James Connolly comic is The Full Life. Did you say
A full
A?
a full life. The one I have, well, I mean, I can't remember if I changed the title of it, which I frequently do. I very likely did. So search for James Connolly, Connolly.
Can't get a James or a Connolly.
or yeah. And if it doesn't pop up, I'll just send it again. But I can't find where when I sent it to you, but I know I did.
Yeah, that could be somewhere because yeah, this it's the other computer's sort of kaput at the moment because the power
Oh,
cords failed, but I did save most of everything. And of course, I've got another portable drive which I've been putting the older years on when they were a bit too much for my computer space. So maybe something's there. I'm not too sure.
all right. I think the most quickest thing to do here is just before I do anything, rename.
I have found stuff in the past, by searching for it.
Sure,
Yeah, it didn't come up in the major searches, and then I eventually found it sitting
sure,
somewhere for some reason.
sure. Here, mhm, mhm, mhm. Okay, that being the case, there it is right there.
Okay, right. This is a PDF, is it? Right. Okay, that's probably, yeah, yeah, might be the reason I'm having trouble finding it. And the other ones,
The young, did you say you got
young
that?
CLR James, yeah, I'm not too sure where that is.
Really? Okay, that being the case, I guess.
Yeah, the PDFs don't have the name headers on them. I just looked, so I haven't.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just have say, Drive Google.com or whatever like that, and a lot of letters. So they're probably there, but I'll just be probably spending a bit of time looking for them.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, not an issue. First rename. And, and anyone's link. Copy. Done. And there you go.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, this is another PDF right there.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I was having trouble there. Probably there, yeah, I'll be probably just searching for all the PDFs.
Okay, sure. So, given that they're very quick reads, I have my idea that the potential exists to triple up and do the panic fables, but
Okay, I don't
I,
think those ones I've ever done.
I'm not committed to that. But
Okay, I'll have a look at them anyway.
okay, sure. And you linked to Scott Adams. If you want, we could do a Dilbert week, one of these weeks,
Oh, right, right. Okay.
if you like. Would you really?
I think he's a study in politics, you know.
You know, but I think he did like 25 years of that, of Dilbert. If you want
Mm.
to do the very beginning of it, or like something out of the middle or something. But if you,
Well, Dilbert's just something it obviously had it was, probably the extreme nerd sort of fandom. It was something I looked at. Yeah, I probably prefer Garfield.
right,
Garfield has more meaning for me than Dilbert, but oh yeah, I can sort of see you had a
right.
certain thing about it. He probably regards himself as one of the greatest cartoonists that ever lived, and I'll think, well, yes, he's a famous cartoonist, but not one of the greatest that ever lived. But he would think so, I imagine. Okay, so what was the other one you're thinking about? The third one?
Okay, I'll cancel. Okay, hold on. Let me do this. I'll J share, copy link. I sure would like it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Found it. Found it. Rename.
David's meeting will be coming up in 45 minutes. David Miller's existential.
Yeah, we have more.
Looks like quite a good one this time. Professor John Carroll. So we've got a full professor. The Saviour Syndrome, Searching for Hope and Meaning in an Age of Unbelief. Very continental
Sure, right. No,
sort
I
of.
saw that. I saw it. Yeah. Sounds like exactly the sort of thing I'd be interested in if I went to these meetings, which I don't. But it's, yeah, exactly the sort of thing people should be talking about. The kind of books I'd be writing if I were writing books, which I don't.
Yeah, I was looking up
Okay, there it is right there.
Panic Fables. That's quite a big one by the looks of things.
Uh, well, we'll see how it goes. My expectation is you should be able to do all three, given the given the nature of the works regarding either the length or the content. I suppose I'm just making excuses, but it's hard to generate the motivation
Generate the motivation
to
for
produce
going to an existential meeting.
no to produce work for an audience that basically doesn't exist.
Oh, you mean the nature of these meetings? It's yeah, such a low level of interest.
Well,
Oh, this is the impression I get from Americans, though, that there's something a bit different, even a bit different from Australians. I get an intense feeling of the easy rider, you know.
Mm,
Americans are very cruisy. Uh, they like easy. If I can find something easy, give it to me. I want easy.
yeah.
And this is the thing I'm starting to think now. It's like a lot of these meetings where people discuss philosophy, I get the feeling they're rhubarbing.
Yeah.
And that was the issue with me, that I'm trying to study things a little bit deeper now. And yeah, I just realised these guys won't put in the time. They think they can rhubarb and that's good enough.
Yeah.
And, I'm looking, some of the details, with Kierkegaard, Hegel, Schiller. So, you got Max Stirner versus Feuerbach and Marx. Uh, you got Nietzsche versus David Strauss, which I just came across, which explains a lot of the comments Nietzsche is making later on. Like, his issue with David Strauss is, okay, you're an atheist. Why are you still a practicing Christian? Christianity's dead, man. If you kill God, you've
Yeah.
thrown God under the bus.
Yeah.
The rest doesn't apply any longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there was some mystics who used to make the claim, and it's like, I think there was some Russian mystic who said, if Christ hasn't risen, it's a waste of time.
Mhm.
These earlier mystics were disclaiming a set of ideals could exist on their own and prove worthwhile. Uh, I think Schiller, this is the interesting thing, Schiller's had issues with Hegel and they came to the surface. Now, he was told by the King of Prussia, this Hegel guy's dangerous. I want you to go and do a job on him. So he had instructions. And basically what Schiller's warning about is Hegel's a dreamer. You can have a set of ideals in your head, and this is very much the modern world. The modern world's slavish to Hegel's view, that Hegel's saying, don't worry, guys, I know there'll be a bit of shit, you'll have a bit of conflict, but at the end of the day, you'll come up smelling like roses. And this is what a lot of people believe. They, oh, yeah, we'll smash the world and then somehow miraculously the rose garden will arise. Well, Schiller was saying, no. There's a little bit of Schopenhauer's warning about Hegel as well, that we have dreams and our dreams look absolutely magnificent inside our head, and they work until the very moment we try to apply them to reality, because reality is a different deal. You can sometimes build on your dreams. You can be successful, but it's quite an art. But we now live in an age where the public think that their dreams will come true. They've been totally sucked in. I mean, you're really lucky if you have some of your dreams come through or come true. This is Walt Disney. This is the evil spirit of Walt Disney. Your dreams will come true. This is what Walt Disney sold. He was making money.
Mhm.
And yeah. So very much Schiller is pointing out the dualism, and this affected Kierkegaard quite a lot, and the is and the oughts. And I think with Hegel, although he knew the difference, he was almost pushing a theory where the is would become the ought in time. They would come together. And this is existentialism is very much built on the separation between the is and the ought. And the point that existentialism makes with the ought is you're free to conceive of any ought you like. You are a free being in that sense. But your oughts might not work in reality. But most people today think they're naive. It's like I remember David Miller calling George Gonzalez. He said he's naive.
Mm.
You've come across George, I assume.
You've brought him up before. He's been here before.
Well, he has a dream, it's a Marxist dream. Yeah, we'll overthrow the oppressors and everybody will embracing each other in the sea of love. And I personally, George, sabre in hand, will rise to be the hero of the occasion.
Mm.
I've had a few wankerous dreams myself in my time, and I got a bit older and I realised they were wankerous dreams. Reality, this is what the whole military training, because I studied warfare and wargaming. It takes, I think they said a Roman legionnaire, it took 4 years of training to produce a good Roman legionnaire. You can't stick a spear in a guy's hand and expect him to be a soldier. Trying to think of his name now. It's a famous writer said, he's talking about the phalanxes of the Persians fighting Julian the Apostate, I think it was. He said, you might have well as given them flutes and called them snake charmers.
Mm.
I remember a famous author, I think he wrote a book on Julian, and he wrote about the Byzantine conquest of the Vandal Africa as well. Oh, well, all right. Thanks for that. So,
Yeah, I don't think it'll be much difficulty getting those in a week. And again, if you feel like stopping at any point with any of them, you certainly are allowed to. Read as much or as little as you like, as always. Up to you.
okay, Dave, thanks for that. And I guess I'll see if Rick makes it. See you on
Hopefully. Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah. Sure thing.
Okay, bye.